Welcome to the inaugural podcast of Words of Prey, which is a Pipeline Artists original. This podcast is rated R for language and brutal honesty. Today, we are joined by our very first guest, Michael A. Stackpole, who is an 8-time New York Times bestselling author. He's known for Star Wars, Battletech. His new book, 4 Gears of War, will be out soon, as well as a bunch of other novels in the Pathfinder series, and also a myriad of self-published books.
Self-published books and originals published by New York publishers.
Exactly. So he has experience in basically every area of publishing, and hopefully he will impart wisdom, and so I can just sit back and...
You didn't tell me anything about wisdom. Is wisdom required? Oh, my God.
Let's talk about some of your most recent books have been tie-in works.
Sure.
First of all, for those people who are just super fans out there who can't wait to play in a universe themselves, right. What would you suggest for them as how to get their foot in the door?
One of the things you have to do is you have to look at any intellectual property from the point of view of the person who owns it. And the person who owns it is going to want the best writer they can find. So what you want to do is you want to set yourself up so you are the best writer they can find. Generally speaking, that means that you've written a number of novels that have already been published, and you've written novels in your own universe. There are a lot of people who will write fan fiction as a way to learn how to write, and it is very convenient. You have characters you're familiar with, settings you're familiar with. You get to write the story, you get to work on dialogue, all those things. But because you're not doing the world creation necessarily, and you're not doing the character creation, you're not developing all the skills that are going to make you attractive to somebody who owns an IP.
Okay, so what you're saying is that if I really, really like, I don't know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I can't sit here in my pajamas and just write a bunch of fan fiction and they're going to sign me on to the show.
No, and they're never going to do that for this main basic reason, and it kind of breaks my heart every time I see it, because when I'm working in someone else's IP, they've got a plan for that IP. You know, they may have a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year plan of a dozen novels or more. And if you're just sitting at home writing stuff, you're not privy to that. So the chances that you might actually twig into one of the things that they need and write it without any contact, 1 million to 1 there. But then, even if you're successful, they've already hired someone to write that very same novel.
Well, I think that one of the exceptions, and this is based a little bit on my background in Hollywood, is actually for spec scripts for
Sure.
TV shows.
That's entirely different.
Yeah, that is one of the things that you can actually practice writing fan fiction on.
Right.
And potentially, I mean, it even works sometimes with even like Doctor Who. I know a lot of people who got a start there, or Star Trek, or, you know, even just something.
But Hollywood and television entirely different from novels.
Yes.
In that regard.
Your most recent tie-in is a book for Gears of War, which is a game I have played for more hours than I care to admit to. What's the title of the new book?
Ephyra Rising. Ephyra being the capital city of the area that they're fighting over on Sarah.
Now, was this something, were you very familiar with the game before you signed on to the project?
Absolutely not. I had not played the game. I was approached, literally, one of the guys who works with the property holder. I'd worked with on a project for another company. And when they were looking for writers, he said, hey, we had a good experience with Mike. You know, asked the editor that they were dealing with, do you know him? He said, yeah, I've worked with him in the past. And so that connection was made there, and they came to me. And they said, we would like this. And once we started talking, then was the point of beginning the research, beginning to learn how to, beginning to learn more about the game. And literally, I mean, I played, with you and others, and benefited from your wisdom of how these things work and get me a sense of that.
Okay, so but before we go a little bit more into diving into a world that is not yours, I do want to make an aside for a piece of wisdom that I think you imparted there that you didn't even realize that you had, because you got the job because you worked in a different universe and they were impressed and had a good and positive experience of working with you.
Yep.
And I say this all the time when I teach classes, and it should go without saying, but basically, number one rule is, if you're working with somebody, don't be an asshole.
Yes,
make sure that it's a positive working experience for somebody, because you can turn out the best product imaginable. But if they don't want to work with you again because, you didn't take notes well.
Absolutely.
And especially I would think that this would be doubly true when you're playing in somebody else's world like you are. This is not your IP. This isn't your world. So you might have some great ideas, but if it's not their vision, or if, you want to change something fundamental, they're probably going to push back a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there have been projects where I've worked in someone else's universe where, the Battletech universe, for example, I've also been, they have been very nice letting me help develop that property down through the years, so that I'm in a different position with that than I am in a lot of other projects. In a lot of other projects, again, they have an idea, they have a general sense of the story that they want, and if nothing else, you have to respect the property. Mm-hmm. You have to see it through their eyes and their vision. Most all the situations I've been in, they love it when you bring your energy and your vision and other things into the universe, but still you have to do that in service to their property. Again, what I've found over and over again is that they're more than happy to let you bring your own energy and your own ideas, but first and foremost, you have to respect what they've already got.
Okay, so I think those are two great points, and I'd like to use them as jumping off. So the first one is, this was a universe that you're not particularly familiar with. What would you say are the pros and cons? I've often thought in some ways it would be easier to do tie-in work, to play in a different, existing place or with an existing character. I think that's part of why, characters we love, like, for example, Sherlock Holmes, there's so many pastiches about him because we know everything about him and we can easily fit ourselves into those shoes. Right. So I would think that in one sense it's easier to do that because everything's already set out there for you. So you don't have to do a lot of, heavy lifting on that. But at the same time, I feel like it would probably be writing with one hand tied behind your back, because there are parameters that you didn't create that you have to stay between. So would you say you can be more or less creative, or how does that work for you?
When you compare and contrast that with writing in your own universe, okay, when you're writing in someone else's universe, you run into stupid things that someone else put in there, and you've got to work your way around. When you're writing in your own universe, you run into stupid things that someone else put in there, but you were the stupid person who put that in there. So you have to work your way around. So you're stretching the same muscles no matter what. The difficulties in working in a tie-in, especially with a property which is character heavy like Gears of War, is you have to make sure to get those characters absolutely right, down to making sure the dialogue is right, down to making sure that the emotional through line is right, and not only the emotional through line that you pick up from the game and the earlier property, but the emotional through line that is projecting those characters forward, which for the Gears of War novel was I was on a razor's edge for that, trying to make sure that I was going to get that right, because the characters in the position that they had, the two main characters, are in big transition points in their life. So it's a double midlife crisis kind of novel, and trying to make sure that everybody recognizes the characters, understands their transition, and is going to be cool with it on the other side. That's a lot of work. Well,
that's something else I'm sure that you've had to deal with a lot. Those of you who aren't familiar with Mike's work, he wrote I, Jedi, which is probably, I would say, the seminal Star Wars novel.
It is a very well-loved novel.
Okay. But I would think that dealing with all of these properties that people have intense feelings about, and you're just talking about how you're taking that into account with Gears of War. So how much time and energy do you devote into making sure that the fans will be quote unquote happy with what you're doing with the characters? And do you ever have to, I don't know, sacrifice what you want to do for what you perceive to be the fans' happiness?
Well, there is always a part in these novels where you're doing fan service, where you are trying to make sure that you're doing the things that you as a fan or you as a reader would find really, really cool. And you have to accept, you just have to accept that there's going to be 10 or 15% of the fans that are going to hate what you do no matter what.
Okay.
I mean, for example, in the third of the Star Wars novels that I did called The Krytos Trap, Luke Skywalker shows up and he's there for about 5 pages. And I wrote him just as Luke from Jabba's palace. The dialogue could have fit in Luke's mouth at that time. And Lucasfilm and 85 to 95% of the fandom absolutely loved it and thought I'd nailed Luke. 10% thought I was the biggest idiot ever because I just didn't get it right. But it's an interesting juggling act because you have to show the reader that you know and love that property as much as they do. And if you fail, well, back in the olden days, they would just throw the book across the room. Now they will take out a website, called Mike Stackpole is a jerk.
I own that domain.
Well, yeah, and 1-star reviews everywhere. Yeah. So,
well, I think it's interesting, and I think overall, I mean, we're obviously talking about tie-in work right now, but I think the same thing goes for other books as well. I often talk to my debut authors or my students, about the fact that we have chosen a subjective profession.
Yep.
There's no right or wrong for what we're doing. It's not like accounting, and 1 + 1 will always equal 2. If you have 100 people in the room, they'll have 100 different opinions, whether
right.
good or bad, about what that book is or what the central points are, or which I think is probably why so many books to film don't get.
Yeah.
They're probably generally good movies, but we all have these ideas in our head that were subjective, and when it doesn't exactly pan out to what we wanted, we're very disappointed in it. And I think I learned this when working in Hollywood and doing a lot of test screenings, and seeing how people would love something for 90% of the movie, and then if the ending was unsatisfying,
right.
it would suddenly be the worst thing that they've ever seen. And I don't see this anywhere else. I mean, in the before times when we'd go out to dinner,
right.
and have a lovely meal, and everything was delicious, and then we order dessert, sure. And I'm not thrilled with dessert. I have never found myself flipping the table over and throwing the dessert.
Well, there was that one time. Yeah.
Then throwing the dessert on the floor and going, I will never darken your door again.
Right.
In fact, I'll go, you know what? This was a great meal. If I come back, I'll either order a different dessert
right.
or I won't get dessert. But it doesn't work that way for movies or books.
But the quality of the experience is entirely different. When you're at a meal is a sensual activity. Okay, I mean it's what you can smell, what you can taste, what you see. It's the ambiance. It's all of those things, and you're a very active part of it because you're the one evaluating whether or not the steak is warm enough or whether it was good or and it's a very social activity as well. Asking someone if they want to try part of your food, so it's a different thing. Whereas with a novel, basically, someone picks up one of my novels, they have tacitly agreed to allow me to control their brain for as long as it takes for them to get through it. And the sensual experience that they're having, all those senses are interpreted through my words, which then they have to reinterpret in their brain. It is a hell of a lot more work.
Well, I always consider it it's a collaboration. It's an unwritten contract between the author and the reader. It's like, I use the analogy of you're basically writing a coloring book.
Yep.
You've drawn the lines, and it's up to the reader to use the colors and color them in, because you're just giving often broad strokes.
Right,
because if
right.
we wanted all of that experience, we'd go to a movie.
Yeah, sure.
Because everything is done for us there.
Yep.
Whereas when we're reading a book, we are collaborating with the author to put our own stamp on it, really.
Absolutely. And that changes. I remember one of the very first letters I ever wrote to an author. I wrote to an author named Alexi Panchin. And I was in college. And I'd read a novel of his, and the name of it's escaping me right now, but it was about a generation ship going through space. And so generations would be born to go colonize another planet. And the last words out of the mouth of one of the main characters at the end of the book was a sentence projecting into the future. Now, when I read it in the 70s, I thought it was very negative. The instructor in college thought it was very positive. So I wrote Panchin to ask him, which was it? And Panchin wrote back and just said, alas, when that was written in the 60s, it was meant to be hopeful. But now, after Watergate, sure, it seems kind of negative. And the addenda to that...
Do you have any more modern stories, Mike?
No, the addenda to that story, however, the addenda to that story was 30 years later, Panchin wrote a review of one of my novels.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really funny.
That's
it
great.
Was really
did
funny.
He like it?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So.
That's nice. Yeah, no. It always, when we talk about whether, especially with tie-in writing for fans or something, there's a quote from Kurt Vonnegut that I really like. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia, which was his way of saying, you can basically only really write for yourself.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I think that's true of standalones or your own work, not really a standalone, even if it's your own series, but I think that there does definitely there's a little more heavy lifting going into making fans happy with something that's pre-established.
Absolutely. I can remember when I was writing the Star Wars comics, in one particular story arc, I put some stuff in because I knew there was one specific woman in downstate Washington State who would scream when she got to the last panel of this comic book.
Was she hot?
She was married, and she was married, very, very nice, wonderful woman. Great story, I'll tell you another time. But after the comic came out, about 3 days later, I got email. And the email said that she was at home and she was reading the comic and she got to the last page and she literally screamed and her family came running to see what's going on. So sometimes you're not just writing for yourself. You can target that fan.
Yeah, no, I think that's really fun. So do you have? I know you do enough of both at this point. You've published, I don't know, I think it's like over 50 novels. I could be inflating.
It's almost 60, I think.
Okay. Do you have a preference for working in tie-in work or doing your own stuff? Is it just 50-50? Do you do both at the same time?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not really a question of preferring one over the other. I get bored very easily. So having multiple projects to work on and to explore, I really, really enjoy. When I'm looking at a tie-in project, things that I look at are, does this property sell more titles than I do? And if it does, great. Then I've got, a new audience I can go to. Is this an audience I already service? With Star Wars, Star Wars has got the space fantasy market pretty well locked up. So that's probably why I won't do a lot of other Star Wars-esque things. This is not going to expand my audience. When I did the tie-in for the last Conan movie, part of the reason I did it was not only because I love Robert Howard and love his work, but also Conan sells a hell of a lot more fantasy novels than I do. And so it's a way to get my name and my work out in front of other people. So there was a marketing value there to that, which I think is really important to look at if you're looking at wanting to do this for a career, because you have to develop that audience. You have to bring new readers in. You also have to do a good enough job that the readers you already have are going to follow you.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted you as the first guest for our show, is because you You tend to, as creative as you are, have a very practical approach to the profession. And in order to actually make a living from it, which I know many of our listeners, that's a very big goal for them, and something that you can't do for a while. But the fact that you parlay your own work with the tie-in work with, I know that you've experimented with Kickstarters and Patreon as well, which I know a lot of people out there are doing the same thing.
Right.
So I think that practical, and if you're going to, you're very good and adept at putting on the business hat when you're talking about writing.
Sure.
Which I think a lot of writers, there's this, what do you want to call it? Yes, exactly. Like, I can only write with my beret and my glass of whiskey, and this is how I do my art. And that's great, but once that's done, you have to sell it, and you have to think of ways to actually make money off of it.
Well, and one of the other aspects of it, just in today, if you do and sell short stories to magazines, for example, or online sources or whatever, you're building yourself an anthology. Well, nobody will sell a single author anthology today unless you're Stephen King or John Grisham or someone like that, because for a publisher, they don't perceive that as being a good return on investment. That doesn't mean there aren't people there that aren't going to want to read it. And this is why we have things like Patreon, or this is why you put together an anthology of your own work and put it out, self-publish it via Amazon or someone else.
I think that's a really good point, because, working for a publisher as I do, I definitely see, less of a return on investment for things like novellas, anthologies, but they're certainly very viable. And not only, and part of this is actually just an American market.
Sure.
Because I see novellas that do very well in, let's say, France. So just because it's not something that a publisher is looking for here does not mean that A, it's not worth writing, and B, that it can't be placed.
And one of the things that publishers are looking for here is, what is your social media presence? What is your audience? Well, the fact is if you've written a wonderful novel and you've got these great characters and the characters have some backstory, writing a short story about their backstory, or if you're doing a trilogy, writing, having a year's gap between book 1 and book 2 in terms of action, and you write a novella that bridges that gap, suddenly you've created marketing material which your publisher is going to love, and for your readers, it is something that they can look at to decide if they're going to want to read your books, because they can get a taste of the character. And 2, if they're already fans of your books, of course they're going to want to read the rest of the stuff about the characters. And since publishers are not necessarily going to want to do the short stories or the novellas, this is something you can do on your own, whether you publish it to a website or you do it via Patreon or something else to earn some money. Basically, it's a marketing plan that pays for itself.
Yeah, I don't disagree. In fact, that I've had 2, I in addition to my day job with Agora, I do freelance work.
Sure.
And this has come up both instances recently where I had a freelance author who had a few beginning chapters of backstory that really didn't fit in the book.
Right.
But she loved them. She was really attached to them. And I said, well, you know what? Focus on the contemporary story.
Right.
And then once that's out, you can tease people with, hey, I've got, this short story over here, or add it. And in the day job side, Gary Phillips just recently released through Agora Matthew Henson and the Ice Temple of Harlem, which follows Matthew Henson, who was an Arctic explorer on his adventures. But Gary has reimagined him as this kind of Indiana Jones-esque character who, solves mysteries and finds things. And it's really exciting, a very pulpy adventure with a lot of historical figures based in 20s Harlem Renaissance.
Sure.
And he wrote a short story that was a one-off, and we weren't quite sure what to do with it. And we ended up, there's a special edition hardcover that we've done, which is like a collector's edition.
Right.
And we added the extra short story in there so that people who were buying this special edition would have on top of the fact that it's really well put together and there's added
Right.
art and everything, just something extra for it.
Sure.
So I think doing things like that is really helpful.
Well, a million years ago, I did an experiment with a self-published book. It was a superhero noir book, and this was back in the days when everybody was telling us that ebook originals, if you were, the top price you could ever offer was $2.99.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took this one book called in Hero Years I'm Dead, and I offered the regular version of it for $4.99. And then the deluxe version was $5.99, and the added material was about an 8,000 word essay talking about how the book came to be written, and breaking down what all the inspirations were and how all this stuff came together. And I put those two out there side by side as an experiment, because my supposition was that for every 4 of the regulars, we'd sell one of the deluxe. It was just the reverse. For every 4 of the deluxes, you'd sell one of the regulars, because readers were willing to pay for that added content, And we all know this about ourselves as readers. We want more. And so this is just, and I think ultimately the thing which is important for either self-publishers or more traditional publishers is that we all have to look at the market. We all have to look at what the opportunities are out there and figure a way to get the best return on this. We're all worried about catching an audience, but once you got the audience, how do you keep them, and how do you keep earning revenue from them so that you can keep doing what you want to do, what they presumably want you to do?
Well, exactly. I recently did a panel with Ben Aronovich, who does the Rivers of London series, and it was really interesting because I've read and loved those books for years, but he partnered with a few other people that he's worked with before and a couple of new people to do a graphic novel series that really, and he chose, which I thought was a really great decision, not to rewrite the novel via the graphic novel. It didn't follow parallel. But he picked some of the side characters and some of the other people that were not explored or were not able to be explored during the book, and really focused the graphic novels on them.
Yeah.
And it's gone over like gangbusters.
When I was doing the X-Wing novels, I developed characters for the X-Wing novels, and then when they decided to do the X-Wing comics, I got to bring in characters that we had set aside for the novels, and characters that were developed in the comics got to appear in the novels, and we get to shoot things back and forth, and it just made it an incredibly rich section of the universe, and had a lot of readers really looking forward for all of this brand new stuff. And the characters ended up, out of the comics, a lot of the ancillary characters became popular enough that Hasbro actually made toys out of them. So the house, I actually have a wall with all the toys packaged, which is just kind of fun.
Well, and I'll let you know, listeners, that since when I got the manifesto for this podcast, it was basically I'm supposed to talk to people as if we were having drinks in a bar somewhere and talking about the industry. So you will periodically hear things pouring. and today's choice is called, both Mike and myself are wine fans.
Right.
So we have a bottle of Latitude 42, which is a Rueda, which is a Verdejo, so it's a green white wine that Mike brought to my attention, and it was really good. So if you hear this noise, we highly recommend this wine. And
by the way, I like what you've done with the place. I've been thrown out of better bars, but
So, okay, so we've talked a little bit about industry and things. Well, actually, you know what? Before we go into more fun topics, which we probably should have, not that this isn't fun, but I would like you to talk to, now realize that I will give the caveat to listeners that this is an author who has been on the New York Times bestseller list 8 times. So his experience with doing things like Kickstarter and self-publishing will probably not resonate with people who are debut authors, because
a lot of them will do it better than I do.
Because they're not going to, he has an existing audience.
Right.
That a lot of people don't have the luxury of having.
Sure, absolutely.
That being said, though, I'm curious to hear how doing some of these auxiliary projects like the Patreon and like your self-published works. If you have any tips or tricks or how you think that really supplements the rest of the things you're doing.
Look, ultimately, as you said earlier, it's all about we're all chasing an audience. We're all trying to get together a bunch of people that think of each author as being a singer at a bar. Mm-hmm. You're singing for your supper, and you want to thrill the people that you're singing to enough that they will come back again and again and again, so you can finally be packing a high school auditorium, or you can pack the local football stadium, or Carnegie Hall, or whatever. Hopefully, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. To find that audience, you have to get out there, and before the audience can come to you, you've got to go to where they are, and they have to be there to see you. This is why being a traditionally published author is great, because if you can get a publisher in New York to be putting your book out, they're the ones that will get it mentioned in Publishers Weekly or give it that opportunity, New York Times, all of those things, which then librarians look at. So your books get into libraries, your books are into bookstores, and that's one possibility right there. You have ways that you get your stories. Or part of the reason that you do online stuff through Amazon and ebooks is because there are some readers that only read ebooks. And then with Amazon, again, there are some people that only read through the Kindle Unlimited program. So you got to have content there that can appeal to them. So you have to go out and find your audience. And again, the most simple analogy is if you want to catch fish, you go to where the fish are. Uh-huh. Okay? And that's what you have to do. And this is why you want to adapt. Some people only like reading short stories, or some people don't want to invest in a novel, but they're willing to invest in a short story. Or once they find you in a short story, they'll invest in a novel. We have to make sure that they know we exist. And that's not by sitting back saying, well, they ought to know who I am. And this is why, when you said earlier, yeah, I've got an existing audience, okay? But, for example, if I list, in trying to do an Amazon Kindle Direct program thing, I can get the book disapproved by mentioning the word Star Wars, even though I'm a Star Wars author, okay? They think that's taking unfair advantage of of their readers. So you have to learn what all the rules are in all these different places and set yourself up for that sort of success.
Well, and I think part of what you're saying, too, is that there are things that you do to, for lack of a better word, make money. Mm-hmm. Whether it's your full length, your own idea, or playing in a different universe. But also, I think that some of these supplementary things, like a novella or a short story, you're doing that less to make money because it's really not necessarily that saleable.
Right.
But you're doing it to keep your name out there or garner a new audience in a different way.
It's marketing.
And the thing is, I definitely don't want to encourage new authors out there to just start churning out free short stories to do this.
Right.
But if you have something that this could supplement.
Absolutely.
And not that short stories are bad. It's just, unfortunately, it's not in the U.S. an environment for them.
Right.
Same thing goes for novellas. So they're good, and if you have them in you, sure. But I would not sit all day and write batches of short stories just to put them online.
Right.
Focus on the big work that you can hopefully sell in some way, and these other things are supplemental.
And to give another example of this sort of thing, doing self-published novels as ebooks, okay, low cost to you as the author, got a high potential for a wide spread because that can be a very big market. So those are all positive for you. Now, are you going to go ahead and do a physical copy? Are you going to print on demand? And if you're going to print on demand, how many are you going to print? I don't print on demand unless I am going to a show. And if I'm going to a show and I have a table, I will print exactly how many I need to sell because I don't want to take any home with me. So you have to begin to learn what that market is like. Now, one could say, well, is it worth it to do all the work to just print up 10 copies and sell those 10 copies? The fact is, if you're at a show and you want to eat, yes, it is. And you realize that when you're doing a physical copy of what was an ebook original, half your sales are going to be people who are buying a souvenir copy.
Right.
They read the book already. They enjoyed it that much. They're buying a souvenir so that you, the author, can sign it.
Well, and I think the other thing about doing self-published work that from a publisher's standpoint that I always have to say is that I have nothing against, I think that there is a route of publishing for everybody, and there's no right or wrong. However, I do always encourage my authors and my clients to seek out a traditional route first.
Yes.
Simply because you have more options that way to make money. Once you self-publish, in one sense, you're handicapping yourself a little bit, because if you don't know how to market, if you're not spending basically 24/7,
Sure.
especially if it's, say, your debut novel, and you're just spinning your wheels online to try to get people to buy this,
Right.
you don't really have a second bite at the apple.
Yes.
With,
yes.
I mean, some publishers will look at it, but I mean, I always encourage people, unless you've sold 10,000 copies online, please don't tell me you've self-published a book.
Well, and this was true of paperback originals published back in the beginning of my career. Publishers and people will look not at how many books you got out there, but what the momentum is of those books.
Right.
If you got one book out and you're churning out a book a year, the fact that you got that persistence, the fact that they're getting better, the fact that they're slowly selling better, that's momentum. That's what people care about. Because you have to remember, everybody is seeing how much money they can make out of this situation.
Right.
Okay, so if you are attractive to a publisher, it's because they see your sales expanding their sales.
Right. And I mean, the two positive things about good self-published sales from a publisher's standpoint are, one, that we can see, if it's a series, for example, that we know that you can write more than one book,
right,
and that you can write them on a schedule. And that's very attractive to us. The other thing is, if you have any sort of significant sales numbers, I mean, so often it's just like, you end up selling them to friends and family, and that's not really helpful. And depending on what level of book you have, one of the things that my publisher says is, if you've got an established series out there, we probably can't do more for you.
Right.
Like, you've already got the momentum. If it's middle, if you come to us and say, hey, I've got this series, it did well, I've got a new idea, a standalone new series, that's what we're good at. But you're very unlikely to sell, say, book 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So once you go, I had a client do this to me the other day who was a brilliant freelance client. It was a great book. And I really encouraged him to send it to a major publisher.
Sure.
And he said, "Oh, I'm just too impatient. I'm going to do this myself."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, it's up to you. You can do whatever you want." And then I got an email back that said, "I'm working on book 2. I've got some great feedback on book 1. What publisher should I send this to?" And I basically went, "You kind of missed the boat." I mean, there are exceptions to these rules. But I went, I told you not to do that. And, 5-star reviews on Amazon isn't going to be like, I'm going to see, I don't know, Tor is going to look at me now. It would have gone much better the other way around. So just recognizing the pros and cons for each of these.
One, you always go where the money is. Okay? Money is supposed to come to the author, not flow from the author. So when you're looking, and I do this even before I sign up to do a project or start looking at doing a project, I look at where is the most money in this market? How can I make sure that they're going to be giving me what I'm worth, and how can I best maximize my investment of time? And that's by picking out a story idea that I know will work. whole lot of factors go into that. And it's not just because it's about making money. I mean, that's certainly very, very nice. And it's great for us all to say that we just want to write for ourselves. But in reality, in writing for ourselves, we want to see how many other people out there agree with what it is we've done. I mean, you can say that you write for yourself, but I have not seen a single author that will not smile at a good review, knowing that someone else liked the book that they wrote for themselves.
Well, yeah, and going back to my earlier accounting analogy, the thing is, again, people are you really have to have somewhat of a tough skin.
Yeah, yeah.
And there will always be people that won't like it. And for the debut authors out there who are looking for an agent or an editor or whatever, and they get a rejection, I think the word rejection has a more negative connotation. Everybody in this industry is in this industry because they were readers. Right, they love to read. And they're looking for that book that they're passionate about. The book that, they can't wait to tell somebody. They stayed up all night reading it.
Sure.
And they can't wait to tell somebody about.
Yep.
So if an agent is rejecting your book, what they're saying is, this one didn't keep me up all night.
Yeah.
And that's actually okay because you want that team member who was kept up all night and who can't wait to say something.
Raymond Feist pointed out many, many millions of years ago, he said, look, if your books always sell out, if you have no negative views or reviews, what this says is you are not distributed far enough. If your market is not big enough that it is pushing product out to people who will hate your book, it's not gone out. You have not defined your audience. Okay? It's those negative reviews. It's that pushback that will define the places where your work can't go any further.
Exactly.
And then you identify those places, and those are the places you explore. Those are the places that you push out.
Yeah, no, I know that it's difficult when it's something that you are so invested with to get a rejection of any sort, whether it's a brutal review or an agent or an editor or whatever it is. But I honestly really think that the industry has to reframe that rejection.
I'm probably finishing my 60th novel now. Mm-hmm. And I had a text today from an editor saying, hey, can we talk about this book? And I don't want to talk about the book, I mean, the book is in. I do not want to listen to what is wrong with it. I know I will have to, and I know I will deal with it. But I've been doing this for over 30 years.
I did the same thing to you. When I edited that anthology, and I was like, we've got to cut the first 5 pages, and also you missed a thing here.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't know what I'm doing like you do.
But that's why, as you said, it's a collaborative process, and your editor is your first collaborator in that sense of saying, look, did you mean to say it this way? Editors are very good at defining precision and making sure that you're putting out the message that you want to push out. Now, whether or not anybody else picks up on it, whether or not they get it.
Well, what I have seen, and we've done enough conferences together for me to see this, I have seen a bunch of people come up and go, the one that stands out to me was the one young boy who had recently joined the military. Mm-hmm. And he didn't really understand what he was signing up for and shipped out. And he brought a copy. The only thing he brought with him was a copy of your book. And he was like, this kept me sane by reading it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the one wonderful thing, like the accountant thing, 1 and 1 will always equal 2.
Right.
But they're not going to get a fan letter.
That's true.
And they're not going to go, you helped me during the darkest time.
Right.
And it's not necessarily the author's responsibility to do that. It's just an add-on benefit for the fact that this is a non-binary business.
Yep.
And you're going to fail a lot. And failure not really being failure, just not success yet.
We're in a curious business because when someone buys one of our books, let's say they pay $10 for a paperback original. In their mind, we owe them $10. Mm-hmm. We owe them $10 worth of entertainment. And if we can't deliver, then then we have failed, and they're never going to read us again.
Well, I mean, think of, and they're not wrong, because
No, they're not.
Think of the amount of time. I mean, I'm a fairly fast reader, but other people aren't.
Right.
And so you're investing days to months generally when you buy any book.
Sure.
And so you're saying you're worth a week of my time,
right.
or however long.
Yeah.
And you darn well better do the best job you can.
But it's important for authors to also understand that is also the only thing we're selling them. We're selling them that 10 hours of entertainment. We owe them nothing more. Okay? The fact that some readers get more out of it, the fact that some readers get enlightened.
The thing is, I think that's why it's wonderful, and it should never be the goal. But if you're writing something that you care about, it's going to come across on the page, and it's going to affect people. And I mean, there's a reason why actually ebook sales have increased during COVID. I mean, of the professions that I thought, if there were a zombie apocalypse,
right,
would not survive. Okay, like writer and editor would have been at the top there.
Right.
Instead, people who are creating creative content are actually, I don't necessarily want to say thriving, because no one is thriving during this time. But the fact that there's a moment of pause, a moment of escape, a moment of, and that's why, there's so many series that, and
there's a moment of perspective.
Yeah,
because this is really, really important. I know I talked to a lot of other writers who have had difficulty, myself included, during COVID, just because it is so omnipresent and it's so existentially challenging that we can't get away from it. And for us as writers, it's going to bleed over into our work. Yeah. It hopefully provide readers a different perspective, a chance to look at it from a different way. In addition to that moment of surcease where they can just forget about it and put forward.
Well, one of the most frequent questions as an editor that I've gotten is, do you want us to deal with COVID in our books? Mm-hmm. And honestly, I've done some research online and otherwise, and the blanket answer is basically no.
Yeah.
It's, we've lived through it, or hopefully have, and we don't want to do that again. And so a lot of people are talking about how, people who are contemporary to the Spanish flu, which is quite equivalent to what we're going through right now, did not write about it.
Right.
It was only later. We deal with it briefly, say, in Downton Abbey, which is contemporary to us. But a lot of authors just didn't, because they don't want that. And there is that, truly, as much as we can deal with things and put them in perspective. But that's why movies and that's why books are so important. We can live vicariously. Right. We can learn vicariously.
Sure.
And we can do it with a level of distance so that we can be greatly affected. I mean, we've both, I'm sure, cried over books and films and everything. But only when we want to.
Right. But I know that, I know it drove you nuts as other authors did when this happened. But, I was able to look at the early Star Wars books and go, okay, I've already done my pandemic novels, and, so here it is, kids. This is how bad it's going to get. Bang. But it is for all of us a method to escape or to cope. Mm-hmm. And the thing that we have to understand, whether you're writing mysteries or romance or fantasy or science fiction or any of those things, ultimately it comes down to the story of the interaction of personalities and people. It's basically the human condition and how we deal with things, the emotional impact it has. And that is critically important. And that is something which has been injected into all of this literature in the latter half of the 20th century and continuing on now.
Well, I think going back to talking about how books can really affect us. We're recording this on a day, goodness knows when it's going to come out, but where we both learned that Beverly Cleary died.
Yes.
At 104. And the number of people, I was watching just the feeds on Twitter going, these books, as both adults and children,
Sure.
How they change somebody's life.
Yep.
Really goes to the impact, and how escapism always sounds like a bad word. And I don't think it's a bad word. Like,
No.
We need a respite. We need the family we don't have. We need the friends we don't have. We need a safe home we don't have.
Back when I got my first real break, I'd been doing BattleTech novels, and I had sold 2 books to Bantam. I met the editor. We got along. She'd wanted to buy something of mine earlier, hadn't been allowed to. So I sent her a proposal for a brand new book. And my significant other at the time, another really good writer friend at the time, my agent at the time, and my editor at the time were all telling me that, this is going to be your breakout book. This is your chance. You have to make it you just have to make it this wonderful Herculean, temple to whatever. And I remember I was, and Stephen R. Donaldson, love his books. I have since gotten to know Steve, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And I remember I was trying to write this book, and I was working on it, and I'm thinking to myself, just putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to write like Steve Donaldson. And, and in saying that, in that realization, part of what I was realizing was what was really going on in my brain was part of me saying, I'm going to fail at this opportunity. And then I stopped and I said, they didn't hire me to be Steve Donaldson. Right? They already got one of those. They hired me to be, Michael Stackpole. And so I sat down and I knocked that book out the best I possibly could. And it is still one of my best books. It's called Once a Hero. And it's a wonderful fantasy novel.
Okay, so one fun question, since we've taken this down to the depths of despair.
Well, no, we're not quite there yet. We keep digging.
You've worked with a lot of tie-in universes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an either or. You can answer whichever one you want. But is there a universe that you would like to write in, be it film, be it TV, be it books, that you haven't had the opportunity to work in? Or is there one actor or actress that you would write for? It's an interesting question because I don't tend to think in films and those sorts of things, and I don't tend to cast my books. Well, see, I always do.
Yeah, I just haven't. The one set of books that I did that I cast were the Ground Colonies books, and I cast with stars and so that was an interesting experiment. And Charlize was one of the ones that I cast.
Of course.
Not intentionally. It was just she fit a particular character.
Oh, sure.
No, if I was writing for her, it would have been a major character. In terms of universes that I would love to write in, Roger Zelazny's Amber universe. Roger was a wonderful man and a friend, and it would be fun to play in that universe. I got to play in one of Fred Saberhagen's universes, in the Swords universe, but that was all Fred was still alive and did an anthology by invitation. Trying to think what else. I mean, quite frankly, having written for Star Wars, It's kind of like hitting the jackpot.
Fine.
You know, I will tell you another property I would love to write for is Batman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, see, for me, like, for example, I'm collaborating on a screenplay right now, and it was much easier for me to do that when even though they're probably, unattainable.
Right.
I am writing the characters based on
Sure.
actors or actresses in that role and how they would play that role. So it just makes it so much easier.
And when I've done screenplays, same thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Is there one person other than Charlize, which we've established, that you would want to write for? Like one actor or actress who you just find?
Boy, there are some of them that are just so good. Depending upon what the role is that they're in. My brain just flicking, flicking through all this stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of them are dead.
Well,
Alan Rickman.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. I mean, he would have been great. Oddly enough, I mean, I wrote the novelization for the Conan film.
Right.
But after seeing Jason Momoa, in the Justice League, and suddenly new depths there that I would love to, I would love to write something or collaborate on a project. That would be great.
Great, yeah. For me, it's Sam Rockwell.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
He fits. I mean, pick it. Sci-fi, comedy, mystery.
One of the other ones right now, it just strikes me, is Sebastian Stan, who plays the Winter Soldier.
Oh, yes.
I'm with the new series and stuff like that, and what I've seen in the films, the way he played that character, there's an interesting energy there that would be fun to.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Like, what are you watching or listening to, whether it's a podcast or a TV show or a film, that you found recently? I don't want to necessarily say inspiring, but what are you intrigued by?
Intrigued is a really, really good way to go. Because, when I'm watching stuff, I'll watch for a certain amount of entertainment value, but I'm also watching for how they put together story. Because one of the things, again, as a writer that we have to acknowledge is that right now, especially television, defines how people understand story. So the tools that television uses suddenly giving us more tools that we can use, and the tools that TV can't use that we have to make sure are used very precisely. I mean, they're still valuable, but... Well,
I'm going to interrupt there for just 1 second to throw this in, because I've always thought that, like, there's been a dichotomy for years between, if you're a film lover, you generally watch a little bit of everything.
Right.
If you're a book lover, you generally stay within your lane, for lack of a better word. And especially since pandemic, there's been a crossover. Like we read these books, but we also binge watch X, Y, and Z. And so for the first time in forever, despite the fact that I've repeatedly made the request, our sales team has asked for TV film comps for books. And I'm thrilled about that, because I think that this really expands potential readership. So continue with what you were saying with that.
So things that, I tell you, the one show which is really impressing me right now that I'm enjoying watching is Superman and Lois on CW.
I haven't watched that yet.
The palette is different from all the other CW shows. The issues that they're dealing with are interesting to follow, and I'm really, especially the actor, and I forgive me because I've forgotten his name. When he was on Supergirl and some of the other shows, I really didn't like it. Mm-hmm. But then he wasn't given very much to do other than be Superman, right? But now in this show, it's like, holy shit, this guy's got range, and this guy is actually bringing it. Yay! Mm-hmm. And so that one I'm real impressed with. I have to say the Disney Plus shows. WandaVision and then Falcon and Winter Soldier. I'm enjoying the way that those are being put together. Mandalorian, same thing.
Well, I think twofold. One is we could do a whole nother hour on how I feel about Lois Lane in every single iteration of
Right.
Lois Lane ever, which
The
unfortunately
new one you have to watch. She is good.
it would be a first. Just to put that succinctly.
But this isn't different enough that I think it would be closer to what you're looking for.
But I think of the shows that you just mentioned, I kind of want to take a minute to go to WandaVision and the fact that, okay, unpopular opinion alert.
Mm-hmm.
I did not love Gone Girl.
Okay.
I thought that the first third of that novel was probably one of the most brilliant ideas I've seen in forever.
Right.
But did not play out. And everybody that tried to copy it kind of fell a little bit flat. And I got very tired of the I am a female, unreliable, potentially gaslit narrator thing.
Right.
I think WandaVision did what Gone Girl ought to have done.
Sure.
And well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was one series that I felt went from strength to strength. Again, watching these things to see how they put the story together,
mm-hmm.
it was really well done in terms of little bits of breadcrumbs here. Then you pick up speed, you keep rolling, and I was very, very impressed.
Okay, interesting aside question, potentially. We're both in the industry, and I used to, it took me forever to be able to enjoy a movie after I worked in Hollywood for a while.
Right.
I always just picked it apart, not even intentionally, but it was just my job, so that's what I do. Yeah. And I do that a little bit with books, but not quite as much. What's something that you've watched recently or even read recently that you shut that part off for? Like, you just got caught up and you weren't analyzing it?
Wow. That's a really good question. Because one, shutting that analysis off.
It's hard, right?
It is virtually impossible.
Uh-huh.
And I think that it's two series, same character, different actors.
Okay.
McGray, done by Rowan Atkinson.
I have not yet watched this new one.
Oh, okay, the one that's done by Rowan Atkinson, I'm not sure how new it is.
Oh, yeah, no.
But, I mean, I love him as an actor anyway. But holy crap, as McGray, that was amazing. And then going back to Michael Shambaugh and watching him doing McGray also, I'm just, I forget who they are.
Okay.
And you're seeing, seeing what's going on. And I have to say, I mean, I do watch a fair amount on Netflix and other things, other streaming services. I watch a fair amount of non-American television.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, it is so much easier to get lost in the story of non-American television than it is American television.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all about that. And I don't actually even have an answer for my own question, because most of the time, as you're aware, I tend to be quite vocal about what's going wrong at the time it's going wrong.
Sure. Annoyingly so, actually. Like right in the bloody middle of something. Okay, let us watch it first, and then we'll do the analysis. And I think one of the saddest things that you see out there are the writers who never do the analysis. They're always just living in the moment. And they're writing the story for the moment. And, when you're writing the story for the moment, what that means is it's going to age very, very badly. And if you're really writing a story about the human condition, whether you're writing about the pandemic or you're writing about any number of things, you want a story where the core conflict and what a character goes through to overcome that core conflict is ageless. We want to be able to pick those things out. Mm-hmm. I read a ton of work from the late 1800s on up through, just because there were best-selling authors in 1895 that we have no idea who they are. And I will read them to try and figure out what they had. And you can see how that is translated up to, the before World War I, and then after World War I, and then, So I can see, I basically I can look at my own career and I can go, okay, genetically, this Australian writer in 1895, this book here showed up in my book, and I never even bloody well knew about it, but here it is. Okay, and I can trace how it got there. I think that we have to be aware of what we're doing and making sure that our work is going to, an aspect of our work is going to speak, down through the ages. I think we owe it to ourselves for our work and for our message, and I think we owe it to both the readers and also, and this is the thing so many writers forget about, the way you learn to write is by reading other writers, okay? Not because they're going to give you an instruction book of saying, do this, do this, do this. But you look at what they do and you see how it makes you feel. You see what works for you, okay? And then you learn how to translate that into your work. And there's going to be another generation of writers, 2 or 3 generations actually of writers, if you have a career, who are going to be growing out of your work. So you owe it to them to do cool stuff that will still be valid then, and you owe it to yourself to be reading their stuff so that you can see what they've left behind, so you can be more progressive, and your work will go that many more generations down the line.
Well, see, listener, I told Mike he had to be wise, and little did he know that that he would end on such a very, very wise note. We can find Michael Stackpole at michaelastackpole.com. Refuse Stormer.
Yes, michaelastackpole.com. Or stormworks.com, which the website that will not be mentioned, which they're both the same, and I can explain why. But,
nope.
Yeah. But also, Amazon, any booksellers will be able to get you my stuff. And I have a Patreon project, patreon.com/Michael A. Stackpole.
And what's your Twitter handle?
At Mike Stackpole.
So this has been the inaugural podcast of Words of Prey, and it is, like I said, a Pipeline Artists original. And Pipeline Artists, which is a brand new website, focuses on education, empowerment, and elevating authentic voices in film, publishing, and beyond. And you can contact us and the other future podcasts at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com. And you can find us and a bunch of other amazing podcasts at pipelineartist.com/listen. So we hope to hear from you. And if you have any suggestions for guests or anything else, or any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will see you next time.